Hello, my friends. This is Uncle Mike. Today is September 2nd, and I got 3 stories for you. So let's just jump right in. So the first story which I'm going to talk about is an update to something which I've been talking about for the past couple weeks. And I'm going to have to go and tread lightly and respectfully on this topic, and that's going to make sense to you in a moment. It nonetheless, despite the seriousness of this first story, it fits in so tightly with everything which these stories is about. Synchronicity, the mysteries of life, all of this sort of stuff that I could not tell this. So with that being said, let's go and jump right in. So this story is going to play off of another video, or really a storyline, if you will, but the storyline began with this video, which was released on August 13th, 2021, so about 3 weeks ago, 2.5 weeks ago. And if you haven't seen this, hopefully you should go back and watch it. But if not, I talked a lot about this tracking of owls, and I told the story of this owl, which Jenny and I have, kind of discovered in the area which we live, and we live in Millersville, Pennsylvania, which includes upon the borough of Millersville campus for the University of Millersville. And in this video, if you were to watch it, I begin by talking about some of the strangeness of Millersville in general, and part of what I talked about was had to do with death. I began by talking about this area right here. As we can see from this map from the 1800s, this is this in modern times. We can see all of these headstones. This is a memorial which talks about all of the people who were buried here. And I was asking the question, I'm like, well, why did they take down the headstones and leave it as just an open field? Because there are plenty of other cemeteries in the area of the same age, and I was just asking that question. Here we have a list. This is from this memorial right there. These are all of the people who were buried in this area. Then I went further on into this video, and I talked about some other aspects that deal with death in campus. In fact, I showed how the center of the campus is more or less a death memorial, starting with this Civil War death memorial. I showed this sculpture, which is seemingly a missile hitting the earth. Here, right in the foreground of the missile, is seemingly like a destroyed earth, if you will. And then another part of this area of campus, we could see another memorial for a former president of the Millersville University, and a plane crash which his entire family perished, and so forth. And then I went in and I talked a little bit more about, the owl, and how I was just drawn to this one particular tree for a couple weeks. And then I found out that there was an owl living there, and I showed here's the tree, and then how the owl is coming out of this hole. And I talked about the hole and its connection to Stranger Things, and how in Stranger Things they show a hole in a tree as a portal into the upside down world. And it's just kind of like talking about that sort of, playing around with these ideas. And I went into this is where the tree is, and I talked a little bit about one of the former presidents of Millersville and his 33-degree Freemasonic history, and how he wrote "Row, row, row the boat" and all this sort of stuff. So if you follow my work, so I put out that story, and then a couple days later, a week later, I told another story about it on what I do with Emily, playing the glass bead game. And I told the story of how I asked Jenny to name the owl, and the reason why I asked her to name the owl is because I was going to use the name she gave as a point of reference to get a better understanding. I'm like, okay, what's this owl about? And she named the owl Howell. And I expressed in the conversation with Emily about how, I was a little bit disappointed with the name Howell. Here I am asking for a name, and then I get a name, and then I'm like, that's not the name I want. Beggars can't be choosers, I suppose, if you will. But it was named Howell. But I was like, all right, that's the name we're going to go and use. And a couple days after she named it Howell, in the book which I'm reading my sons, which is The Eye of the World from the book series The Wheel of Time, a character was introduced, literally like a few days after Jenny named the owl Howell, and I talked about that. A character was introduced in the book whose name was Howell. And the character in the book is a dark friend. And so in the context of the book, what a dark friend is, it means he submits to the Dark One. He's a spokesman for the Dark Lord, the kind of the Satan type character who is the antagonist of this book series. And so I was a little bit, unnerved. Here I am having this experience with the owl. I'm trying to have, approach it with a little bit of fun, but then I get, and I specifically say, let's name the owl, and then I'll look for that name for any sort of meaning to get more insight. And then sure enough, what do I get back is this name that says like this owl is a symbol of the Dark One. I'm like, this is not what I'm looking for. I got enough stuff going on. I don't need to be interacting with the Dark One. That's kind of the space. That was the space where I was in with this whole owl story. So why am I telling you this? What is the reason for bringing this back up again? You might be asking. Well, something happened. Something happened on campus. So in the last week or so, the fall semester began, and the students started to come back into town. It's a school which has an enrollment of about 7,000 students, and this is what I'm talking about right now in terms of I want to be delicate. I want to approach this with respect, because what I'm about to talk about is a real person. And who has real friends and real family, and what I'm going to talk about is a tragedy for them, and I want to be respectful for them. But the nature of what all of this kind of synchronistic investigation, I can't overlook this. So, with that being said, I'm going to jump right into it. Last week, a student was found dead on campus. You can see right here, August 30th, 2021 is when this story came out, but the student first went missing, I think it was on the 24th. And where they found the student's body was right here. This is the boundary of the campus. You could see it's kind of gray and shaded right here, and then right outside of campus, right by the Conestoga River, and this point right here, you can see it says Cove Drive and Light Road. As I indicated in the earlier video, this is where the tree is, and we can see that this tree is less than a mile away. It's 3,600 feet from where the body was found. And so, this happened 2 weeks after this whole sort of the storyline which I've been talking about. But we're just getting started right now. So here is a picture of the young man who was found dead. They ruled it a suicide. And as you can see, this story is in TMZ. So, you ask the question, why would the death of a freshman at a small college in Pennsylvania get picked up by TMZ? Well, it's because he was a child actor. And, if you follow this work, or my work, you know that I also use Hollywood as touch points in terms of kind of understanding reality. And, now we have a child actor. And this child actor, he he did, quite a few things. Most of them, smaller things, maybe bit parts in soap operas, so forth. But he was also, or probably what he was best known for, was a role which he played in a movie which starred Paul Rudd, a pretty big A-list actor. So this is a story from the Daily Mail, and I use the Daily Mail all the time as one of my primary pieces of gathering data of the stories which are told to, the mainstream storyline. I found the Daily Mail to be the perfect intersection of celebrity gossip, unusual stories from around the world, and basic, news stories. It's that perfect intersection. So this is from the Daily Mail. This story is from the 30th. Death of child actor 19 who starred opposite Paul Rudd in the 2011 movie Our Idiot Brother is ruled a suicide after he was found dead near a college campus in Pennsylvania. Matthew Mindler, that's the young man's name. He was a freshman at Millersville University. He was declared dead on Saturday. He vanished on Tuesday night after walking out of his dormitory. I showed you where they found him. He was reported missing, and so forth. And here we see, here's him as a young boy. Here's him with Paul Rudd. So part of, what makes synchronicity is they're not just coincidences, but they're coincidences that are meaningful. And so that means there's two layers. There's the coincidence itself, but then part of the detail associated with the coincidence is that it has a personal meaning. So the first coincidence is 2 weeks ago, I started talking about, this kind of ominous sign happening on Millersville University or on the campus and dealing with death and all this sort of stuff. And, I didn't say oh, there's going to be someone dead or anything like that. But sure enough, there was a death on campus, and, obviously people die. But, students don't die that frequently, and particularly, on a small campus. And so that's a coincidence. But here now we're going to go a level deeper. So he's best known, Mindler was best known from this film, Our Idiot Brother. So let's look a little bit deeper in here. So his biggest role to date was Our Idiot Brother, which follows Rudd's character, an idealistic farmer who upends the lives of his three sisters, played by Elizabeth Banks, Zooey Deschanel, and Emily Mortimer. Mindler portrayed Mortimer's son, River. We could see right here, this is from the Wikipedia entry of the cast. And here we have Matthew Mindler, and his character's name was River Bing. And so now we've got a little bit more meaning because, my work's called Susquehanna Alchemy. I talk about the river. I talk about rivers all the time. So as a symbol, regardless of whatever the river may be, I get emails from people all the time. I'm often introduced as the river guy. This is a meaningful symbol. So now we see that this young man who died, who's an actor, and the character the part which he is best known for is named River. But it's going to go and get deeper. So I talked a little bit about Daily Mail and how I use Daily Mail a lot. If you're familiar with my work, I talk about a lot of stories which we find from the Daily Mail. So here, this is from the Daily Mail. This came out on the 30th. And as I was preparing to tell this story, if you're familiar with how the Daily Mail works, is it has on the right-hand side a list of all of these other stories beside the main story which you're reading. And another story shows up. And on the right-hand side, and you could see the story came out on the 31st, and it's about Sharon Stone. Sharon Stone's a Hollywood actress. She's probably been out of the pop culture spotlight for some time, but, in the 80s and the 90s, she was pretty well known. And she is in the the pop culture sphere and Daily Mail, because she is telling the story that her heart is shattered after her 11-month-old, we got 11 again, you know, for the number folks, baby boy suffered organ failure and died. You know, another tragedy, another life which is gone. And we can see that this 11-month-old, his name was River William Stone. We could see he died on the 30th. We could see on the 30th is when we've got Mindler. Mindler was announced dead. So now we have in like the same sort of in the same platform, Daily Mail, we're seeing the same story. We're having similar stories about deaths, untimely deaths of an infant boy and of another boy, of a young man, corresponding with the name River. And here we have River Stone. The same time, we've got 11 again. And so, like, you know, that's going on. But we're going to bring it down another level. So this happened on the 31st is when this story, when this story was passed, or it was released, excuse me. But something else happened on the same weekend. So the 30th was the Saturday, if I'm correct. And I guess the 30th was Sunday. So on the 29th, a child's body was recovered from the Susquehanna River. And, you know, this 5-year-old, he drowned in the Susquehanna. And the Susquehanna is, you know, that's the river which I'm kind of associated with. And, you know, part of the just the occurrence of life is, you know, people do have untimely deaths. And there are drownings of children in the Susquehanna. I remember the last one, which probably occurred, at least that I'm aware of, was a couple of years ago. So this is not unheard of, but now we're going to go and we're looking at the timeliness of it. So this child was swept away, and he was playing near the river when he fell into the water just north of Falmouth Axis Boat at 111. So it's not exactly 11s again, but we got the ones, Collins Road, in Falmouth. And so now we've got a third untimely death. We've got a 11-month-old, we've got a 5-year-old, and we've got a 19-year-old, all roughly at the same time, all with this kind of river symbology. And where it gets maybe a little bit more, a little bit tighter in terms of the synchronicity is we can see here that he was playing in the water right by the Falmouth Axis Boat. And we remember here, we've got River Stone. We've got River Stone as the name. So let's go and look at, this is from Google Earth. This is Falmouth Boat Launch right here. And if you're familiar with some of my past work, there's a certain place on the river which I've done videos about myself. I've brought Ross Ben there, and we did a video about this one particular place. And it's even in my Rights of the 40th Parallel, I talk about these rocks right here, these very, very unusual rocks that are in the river. So these river stones, and this is where the young boy, this is where he was swept away, right in the stones. And I'll go and show you right here. This is Rights of the 40th Parallel. Inside the Rights of the 40th Parallel, I have these 4 different spots, 1, 2, 3, and here's the 4th one. And the 4th one is, we can see these are the rocks, and it is at Conewango Falls. This here is Conewango Falls, Falmouth Boat Drop. It's all the same. So now we have, you know, after I began all of these stories, you know, the stories with Howell and Millersville and death and strangeness on August 13th, then within a 3-week period, we have 3 deaths, one happening on Millersville University. You know, let's go look at the timeline. So I first start talking about it on the 13th. On the 20th is when I talked about Howell, Howell Goad in the Wheel of Time with Emily. Then on the 24th is when Matthew Mindler was last seen. This is probably when he died. On the 28th, his body was found. He was declared dead. On the 29th, Roman Harmon, that's the name of this young boy. His name was Roman Harmon. He drowns in the Susquehanna. And then on the 31st, Sharon Stone announces River Stone's death. I'll just even throw this out, like this last name Mindler, M-I-N, and then we've got this Roman, which is an uncommon name, and then if it has anything to do with like the Roman Empire, I don't know, but that's not how the spelling is, but we've got this M-I-N, and this M-I-N is played right here, and Harmon isn't exactly the same as Sharon, but we do have this A-R-O-N, A-R-M-O-N, I'm just kind of pointing out all of these different similarities, again, I'm trying to be as delicate as possible because, Matthew Mindler is a real person. Roman Harmon is a real person. River Stone was a real person. And, River Stone, if you do read the story, he died in a children's hospital in Pennsylvania, not near me, out near Pittsburgh, but nonetheless, that's another topic. I've been discussing children's hospitals in the last couple of weeks. So, we got this. We got this going on. I'm not really certain what to say about it, but the entire storyline about it, it just has me... It just has me even maybe more aware of, what we're talking about and more intrigued by, what is the nature of what we're doing here? We're talking about these stories, and I'm just using my own life as the compass point, the actual events of my life and the things that interest me. And there's an audience here, that's you guys, you're watching it. These aren't just stories in my own head, and there's seemingly something going on. So, all right, we're going to move on to now story number 2, which is hopefully a little bit, equally as strange, a little bit lighter in terms of material. And this is called Buchanan Birth Memorial State Park. And so this past weekend, so all of this was going on, I'm not sitting on the edge of my seat, like following, looking at a browser trying to figure out what's going on, but I am aware of all of the storyline of what I was just telling you. But I did some other stuff this weekend as well. And my good friend Jesse, it was his birthday, and one of the things he and I had been talking about is we want to go down to check out the James Buchanan Birth Memorial, because we both recognize there's something sus going on with it, and we don't know exactly what it is, so we're going to go and do a road trip. So I've talked about James Buchanan in the past, but for those of you who aren't familiar, I'll just bring you back up to speed. Who is James Buchanan? James Buchanan was the 15th president of the United States. What makes James Buchanan interesting is he is generally considered the worst president of the history of presidents, and he lived in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And so I've talked about him a lot, particularly in the Mystic Lancaster series, episode 4. I go into James Buchanan, question what and whom he is. He is considered the architect of, setting the stage for the Civil War. It was under his leadership as the president that set the stage. He leaves office, and then a month later, the Civil War breaks out underneath Abraham Lincoln's watch. And, Abraham Lincoln is often considered, the best president, whatever you want to take in with those sort of monikers of best and worst, but Buchanan is known as the worst. Here's some other stuff. Biographers have variously suggested he was celibate, homosexual, or asexual. He was the only bachelor president. Buchanan died of respiratory failure in 1868. He was buried in Lancaster, where he lived for nearly 60 years. Modern historians and critics condemned him for not addressing the issue of slavery or forestalling the succession of the southern states over it. Historians and scholars consistently rank Buchanan as one of the country's worst presidents. So he's got a birth memorial. He's got a birth memorial, and it's a little bit odd. And here's a picture of it. This is the James Buchanan Birthplace State Memorial, and it is this pyramid right here. And so this is what me and Jesse wanted to go and see. And just to give a little point of reference, part of the American culture is we always we honor all of our presidents, and we honor their where they were born, we honor all this where they died, and all this sort of stuff. And so this is the Buchanan Birth Memorial. And just to give you a point of reference of other president birth memorials, this is the birth memorial for Thomas Jefferson. This little headstone. Here was born Thomas Jefferson, lover of liberty. And so here is the Abraham Lincoln birth memorial. This is in Kentucky, where he was born. You can see this is a rather grandiose tomb. And then we have, this is Ulysses S. Grant, and his birth memorial is just the home he was born in and raised, and they just turned it into a museum. So we could see there's a wide range in terms of how birth memorials are done, but nonetheless, this is where the agreed upon worst president of the United States, this is what his birth memorial looks like. So let's look at this a little bit more right now. So I'm going to read about the monument. Harriet Lane Johnston was President Buchanan's niece, and since he never married, she served as his first lady. She led the effort to create a memorial to her uncle. She made several efforts to purchase the birthplace, Stony Batter, but was ultimately unsuccessful. When she wrote her will in 1895, she created a trust whose task it was to pursue the construction of the monument to her uncle. Upon Harriet Lane's death in 1903, the responsibility for the building of the monument devolved upon a banker in Washington, D.C., E. Francis Riggs, and a lawyer from Baltimore, Lawrison Riggs. So if any of you are familiar with Washington, D.C., and you're of a certain age, you remember there used to be a Riggs Bank. It's no longer there. It was acquired by PNC, I want to say in the 80s or 90s, but Riggs Bank was really significant. It was known as the President's Bank. It was filled with controversy, money laundering. Excuse me. So this is that Riggs. This is that Riggs family. It says Lawrison Riggs, not to be confused with E. Francis's brother of the same name. I mean, that's just friggin' weird right here. Oh, this guy, Francis Riggs, has a brother whose name is also Lawrison Riggs, who he worked with to build this monument, but it's a different Lawrison Riggs who has the same name, but they work together. That's just ridiculous. I don't know what that is, but everything about this is suspect, but nonetheless. As the area was no longer a center of commerce, it's talking about Stony Batter, where this monument was born, which is in the middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania. And it's saying since this area was no longer a center of commerce, at one point it was a center of commerce, and has become a remote place, it is uncertain why it took years to purchase Stony Battery. So whoever owned it was not willing to sell it for whatever reason, but the Riggs family were finally successful in doing so in 1907. So she was trying to acquire this. We know that he died in 1868. She was trying to acquire it for some time, and then in 1895 she still wasn't able to, and so it was finally another 12 years later they were able to purchase this land for whatever reason. The monument is in the shape of a pyramid built of native stone. Wide and Nolting, an architectural firm from Baltimore, designed the memorial. The pyramid is 38 feet square, 31 feet high. It's made of 50 short tons of American gray granite, 250 tons of mortar and native stones. The construction began in 1907 with a workforce of 20 men. They built a small railroad to haul the heavy materials. From the mountainside to the construction site, the workforce grew to 35 men, and the monument was completed in late winter with a surrounding iron railing. And then in 1911, the Pennsylvania General Assembly accepted the monument from the trust, and Buchanan State Park was formally established. So 1911, this was... let's just begin from the will. This is a 16-year process. We could see that a lot of men went involved. There were this guy Francis Riggs was involved. We see a architectural firm was involved in the designing of it. You could look at, here's that iron rail they're talking about. You could see this is like, a lot of time and effort went into building this, okay? Let me give you a point of reference of where this is. This is the Buchanan Birthplace State Park. This is Baltimore, the closest big city. It's about 75 miles away. This is Lancaster. It was probably about a 90-minute car drive to go to this birthplace. So a couple things I want to tell you about, like the trip. So the first thing is, when we were driving along, we're in a very rural part of Pennsylvania. We saw it looked like a ruin. It was an old furnace. This is where they used to make the pig iron. We pulled over and we got out of the road and we're checking out. And this is right off of a road, but it was a secondary, a tertiary road through a very rural place, small little parking lot. And as we were there, come driving up was a car, and a man, older man, I'd say probably like 65 years old, he gets out and starts talking to me and Jesse, and then he leaves. And Jesse and I were both kind of like, what do you think that was? If you following the stories with like Ross Ben, the episode in which Ross gave the first tour in the Wissahickon Creek, and we told the story about how this guy came out of the I Am Temple and how that was strange. Jesse was there for that. First thing we thought, I was like, that's kind of weird like that. We both were like a little bit suspect of who this guy is. Like, it was just bizarre. Like, he showed up, both from a perspective of like, is there something kind of like strange and mystical going on, or is there something else? Jesse, he was in the Marines, and his Marine detail was he worked embassy detail. He worked as like, the guards at different embassies, in South Africa and Macedonia. And so he kind of has like that, in his understanding of reality, is he thinks kind of like a guard. And so part of him was like, is this like the guards that are looking around this general area? And we'll understand the general area in a moment. But nonetheless, that's how the day began, or the trip out there. That began, the guy disappears. We didn't think much. We continue with our journey. And we get there to the monument, and the monument was, while we were there, we were kind of, it's not a particularly popular park. It's, it's in not a very populated area to begin with, and it's not a spectacular park. There's not a lot of people going through. But when we were up at the pyramid, we were visited, if you will, by, a couple of things. It seemed like, we were buzzed by a helicopter, someone on a motorcycle, not like your typical, like, weekend Harley driver, someone who was like all outfitted in like a dirt bike. You couldn't see the face, and in a I don't know, like a sporty kind of motorcycle outfit, drove up to the parking lot we were in. The parking lot's probably 100 feet from where the monument is, so you can see the parking lot. Came and like parked there for a minute, stayed, and then like drove off, made himself known to me and Jesse. You know, maybe none of this is related. Maybe we're making connections. Maybe we're not. But these were the details that happened. And there's a lot of strange things also with it, like with the area. And a lot of that is subjective. You know, it felt kind of eerie, but we both are kind of looking at, you know, admittedly looking for something eerie. So I don't want to put too much weight into that, but we did feel that. But before I get into the weird stuff, I'll show you a couple of videos. So I do have some videos here. Let's go to that one. I'll go to this video first. This is kind of like the walking up. I thought that was a video. Maybe it's not a video. Yeah, I tried to pull it in here. It didn't let me bring the videos. So, nonetheless, so we go there. And, looking at the monument. So what I want to show you right here is there's a symmetry here, a very obvious symmetry. Everything is based upon this center line, the center line of the pyramid. You have this little structure right here, which is centered on it. You can see the gates are centered on it. Like, you know, I spent some time in my early 30s as a designer working for an architect. Like, I've got a little bit of insight in terms of like laying things out and thinking about how you're going to lay things out. And, you know, it's very obvious. This is going to be laid out on a center line, and it's all around this entrance. So let's go and look at this, what it says right here. And so what it says right here, this is a little bit more clear. This monument marks the birthplace of James Buchanan, 15th President of the United States, born 23 April 1791, died 1 June 1868. So the first thing which I want to point out is, no matter how you want to look at this, this is, you know, whether you want to say a purposeful mistake, whether you want to say the mistake is a code, because that is very, very common. Like when you go and you look at, like, let's just say the Georgia Guidestones, like there are typos in it. In the John Smith map of Virginia, there's like a mistake with that reversed 40. Whenever you see something which should be done quote unquote perfectly and it's not perfectly, you have to at least ask why. Certainly there's always the possibility that it was just a mistake, but I'm going to suggest this is not going to have a mistake. So as I said before, the most obvious thing is this should be centered. This is all centered on this center line. And when we go and we look at this is the center line right here. You could see that this text is not on the center line. It is all left justified. It is left justified. So the construction of all of this, like, you know, they do this in pieces. And this was probably the last piece. This piece of granite was slid in, and then the shelf was put on the bottom. This was made separately. The craftsperson who carved this crafted. You can see here is the peak of this. It should be centered on it, and it is not. It's left justified. You know, what should have been done, like how you would have done this, is you would have just counted how many characters and spaces there would be, figure out what the center is. You start with that center, whatever that letter would be, and you would go to the left and the right. That would be the technique of centering it. It's possible that this could have been spread out, that this was all equally justified, where the beginning and the left and the left and the right would, of all of these lines, would lie up, and that would more or less give a centering, but that didn't happen either. The biggest problem is this line right here. It says the 15th President of the United States. So what could have happened if this would have all been centered, that this United States would have been carved right here on the center line, and this would have been shifted over. And that's a possibility. The other possibility is it's calling him the President of the United States. And the United States is, depending upon what you want to go with, like the United States, in an official way of referring to the country as the United States, it is either an informal way of calling it, versus the United States of America and the United States, or, if you want to be a little bit more conspiratorial, when United States is mentioned versus the United States of America, you're making reference to a corporate entity, where the United States is a corporate entity, and the United States of America was the thing which the founding fathers started. No matter what, like if this was meant to be the United States of America, like here's the space for it. And it wasn't carved in. You could have carved in, you could have done the spacing a little bit differently, and the United States would have been right here. And then this would have been visually looked. Like, look at this. Like, look at the amount of effort that took to build this. Like, the 40 men who came to it. The 40 years to go and create this monument. And then there's going to be this, like, it just doesn't make sense. Why this should have either been centered or it should have been the United States of America. No matter what, this was done. Maybe it's just shoddy work. Maybe it was just done shoddy work. There's possibly that. There are all of these different possibilities. But right now, I'm just saying, there's something which is seemingly off with it. But that's not the only thing which is seemingly off. So let's go and look at this shelf right here. I don't know what you would call this. Maybe it kind of acts like a header. So when this was constructed, it was probably constructed in different pieces, and they built a railroad. They built a rail line to bring all of these heavy pieces to this location. Like, this is legit. There was a lot of money to do this correctly. They were doing it the right way. This was seemingly done well. And so these are different pieces of granite right here, which were assembled. And probably what would happen was you would do all of these outer pieces, and then this, I'm going to call it a shelf, was placed in, and then once that shelf was placed in, then this last piece with the carving would have been placed in right there. So if we go and we look at this shelf up closely, it's not right. It's not right. There's a mistake. And what the mistake is, we're going to go and we'll look at this side right here. And now look at this side right here. We're going to look at it a little bit more closely. What this left-hand side right here, there is a notch. If you can imagine, the way that this was cut is it would slide in and there's like a notch. It's going to be, if you're looking straight down, it would be like an L shape. And you can see it right here. This is the edge of this line right here, and then the outer edge extends out right here. It extends out and it slides right in. And that's one way of making it. That's a finer detail. It's a finer detail of the shelf. But if you look on the right side, that edge doesn't exist. That edge doesn't exist. In fact, you could see right here, you could say, well, maybe it broke off. Well, if it broke off, like, you don't see any mortar right here, there is this, it's been cut at a 45-degree angle, very, very precisely and polished right there. The different possibilities on why this would happen. Like, maybe when this shelf was brought to slide in, they saw that it was slightly too big and they had to, like, field modify it. They would have kept it in symmetry. This entire structure is about symmetry, and there is no symmetry right here. This left side has this little flange and this does not. It would have been very, very easy to, you could say, well, maybe it was too long and they cut that notch to slide in. Well, that doesn't make any sense, because they would have probably cut it on just a straight line right here. One, it would have been an easier cut than having to make a notch, and two, it would have been in symmetry with that. So no matter how, I mean, possibly maybe this broke off and then they polished this off like to make it look finished, but I doubt that as well because they would have done this to both sides. No matter what, no matter how you want to look at this, there's something incomplete. There's something off with this. And if the one thing which we've learned by looking at other monuments, that whenever we see an obvious error, a typo, like we see on the typo on the Georgia Guidestones. I think the typo is in the word pseudonym is misspelled. The way they say what is the Latin for New World Order on the $1 bill, the New Ordis, and it's an S word. That's also like a typo of what the actual Latin phrase should be. Whenever we see these mistakes, we should know that there is a reason why there is a, I say mistake with quotation marks. There's most likely a reason why, and it's telling us we should delve a little bit deeper. So because of that, I'm going to give this a sus rating right here. All right, so now let's move on to the final segment, and we're calling this final segment Wallace Simpson and Fort Ritchie. So when Jesse and I we didn't want to just go out to, we weren't just going out to taking this 90-minute drive out to the Buchanan Memorial or Monument. We also wanted to look at this other area which was nearby, and it is the area of Blue Ridge Summit. Here's Buchanan's birthplace. It's about 30 miles away is Blue Ridge Summit. And the reason why we wanted to go to Blue Ridge Summit is because it also is a little bit mysterious and strange. We wanted to know what was going on there. And so the reason why it's interesting is there's a couple of things. Like in this area is lots of continuity of government sites. We're right by Camp David. We're right by, I think it's called Ridge Raven Mountain, which is a known continuation of government site that's right around here. And Blue Ridge Summit is the birthplace of Wallace Simpson. And Wallace Simpson is, she's an interesting character in the historical narrative because she is the woman that Edward VIII, who was, I don't know if he was the king or if he was going to become the king, but he was the king of England, and he gave up the throne in order to marry this woman because she'd been divorced a couple times. That's why if he was going to marry her, he had to give up the throne. And so this woman was born right here. She's a real interesting part of history. So we were like, hey, we're going to go out here. Let's go drive through Blue Ridge Summit. Let's go see what that's all about. Like, why would this woman be born there? This is seemingly in the middle of nowhere. And, I talked about Daily Mail to begin with. Sure enough, in the days leading to in the days leading up, we can see that, the days leading up to this trip on August 15th, we could see that the Daily Mail, did another story of Wallace Simpson. Wallace Simpson dominated the Duke of Windsor. That was going, I guess he was going to be the king, and he said he wasn't going to be it so he could marry her, and he actually liked it. This story came out on the 14th of 2021. Here they are, and this is the Wikipedia. We see entry of her, Bessie Wallace Warfield. This is, this is the same woman right here, and we see she is born in Blue Ridge Summit. And we have our Blue Ridge Summit right here. So we are taking our trip. We've got like about, we've got like a half an hour trip to get to Blue Ridge Summit. And along this journey, like first from Lancaster out to here and then down here, one of the things which we were talking about was baseball, J.D. Salinger, The Catcher in the Rye, and Field of Dreams. I made that a video. Actually, no, I talked about it on the Real Trilateral Commission, and then I did an episode of Higher Side Chats where I go into that in greater detail. Like at the time of this recording, that Higher Side Chats has not been released, but that topic had been top of mind. In fact, I'm going to go deeper. That's the story which I'm going to go even deeper with because a lot more information came out. But where I was really interested in was this correlation between, or I wanted to investigate further between like J.D. Salinger, the author of Catcher in the Rye, and the connection with baseball and the Field of Dreams. And I was talking to Jesse about it because Jesse's like, he knows a lot more about baseball than I do. And so we're talking about it on the car ride, and, I'm kind of doing some research as he's driving. So, okay, so that being said, that's just kind of like the backdrop. So that being said, we're driving through here. I've never been in this part of Pennsylvania before, and we go through this town called Mercerburg. And as we're driving through Mercerburg, we pass something called the Mercerburg Academy. And I'd never heard of it before. And so I'm like, what's the Mercerburg Academy? Here we are in the middle of like nowhere, Pennsylvania. And there's this really kind of like fancy looking private school. And sure enough, it's a pretty exclusive boarding school. It's not, there's like a hierarchy in boarding schools, kind of like there are in colleges and universities. Like in the colleges and universities, you've got like the Ivy Leagues, and then you've got like a step down from there and a step down from there and so forth. And the same thing is true within like boarding schools. Like first off, if a boarding school is, any boarding school puts you in a very kind of like elite class because only a small percentage of people are educated in boarding schools. And there's like, I forget what they're called, but there's like the top 10 boarding schools. That's like, Andover and Exeter and Hotchkiss and stuff like that. And Mercerburg seems to be like one level below that, but it's legit. And so I'm looking at it. I'm curious. I'm like, Jesse and I are on this mysterious kind of mission, and like, I don't know what we're looking for. We just know we're looking for stuff. So the first thing we see when we leave shortly after we leave the Buchanan State Park is this Mercerburg Academy. And I'm like, all right, what's going on? And I first pull up the Wikipedia page, and it's 444 students, which is, that's an interesting number, particularly as Susquehanna River, they say, is 444 miles long, which it isn't, but that's what it says at the plaque at the mouth of the river right by the Baseball Hall of Fame. I'm like, all right, this is really interesting. So I go and I just do some little bit more research. And so this is from the Mercerburg Academy Wikipedia entry, and it says, in 1836, the Pennsylvania General Assembly granted a charter to Marshall College to be located in Mercerburg. And then, his successor in the position was John Williamson Nevin, who served until 1853 when Marshall College joined with Franklin College in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, to become Franklin and Marshall College. So if you know the Susquehanna mystery aspect of it, a major part of it is this what I call the invisible college at the Susquehanna River, where we have High Point Scenic Vista right on the Susquehanna River here, and it is in a T-square from 3 colleges: Elizabethtown College, York College, and Franklin and Marshall College. Franklin and Marshall College is, this is about 90 miles away from, right here's Mercerburg. So this is where Franklin and Marshall, we're talking 90 miles away. I had no idea this even existed as an entity, but then sure enough, it is the one half of, this campus represents the Marshall aspect of Franklin and Marshall, which is a very, very key part of this invisible college. So I'm like, okay, this is another one of these significant markers. I'm like, all right, that's kind of interesting. So it then becomes Marshall College, what was Marshall College, is no more. There's Franklin and Marshall, but the campus here in Mercerburg still exists. Then it becomes Marshall Academy, and then it becomes Marshall Collegiate Institute, and then it was changed to the Mercerburg College, and then still underneath this charter, it became the Mercerburg Academy. So this Mercerburg Academy is a prep school for 9th to 12th grade. And it does have some postgraduate. It's 90 miles northwest of Washington, D.C. All right. So remember, I said that I have been in this whole sort of trip, which Jesse and I were on, like I've been really, delving deep into J.D. Salinger and The Catcher in the Rye, and just just curious, are there any more connections with baseball? And one of the things which really had me interested was J.D. Salinger's connection to the intelligence industry during World War II, because I'm always intrigued by that in terms of touch points for research. And I'm looking at all this. We drive through here, we see Mercerburg. So, okay, why am I talking about this? Because a big part of Catcher in the Rye, if you're not familiar with Catcher in the Rye, it's the story of this guy, Holden Caulfield, who was a disenfranchised student at this elite prep school or boarding school. So now here we go, and we bump up against this boarding school. And this boarding school, I'm already just interested in it because, one, I'm always interested when I see something which is kind of like, okay, this doesn't, any boarding school, any of these kind of elite institutions that prepare, the leadership for business or for government, they often come from boarding school worlds. And so I find that interesting. And then also I was curious about all of this Holden Caulfield stuff. So let's go and look at this. So from, this is, a fandom wiki of Catcher in the Rye, and it says Pensy Prep School is an exclusive boarding school for boys in Hagerstown, Pennsylvania, which Holden Caulfield attended before being expelled. So the boarding school, the fictitious boarding school which Holden Caulfield went to, was in Pennsylvania. And so the general thought is, because remember, J.D. Salinger is very reclusive, very mysterious. The general thought is, I just cut this from some article, is scenes in J.D. Salinger's iconic novel, The Catcher in the Rye, may have been inspired by the author's time attending the Valley Forge Military Academy in Wayne, Delaware County, Pennsylvania. So this is outside of Philadelphia, probably 3.5 hours away. Salinger, who died Wednesday, so whenever this article was written, so probably 10 years ago, attended the academy from 1934 to 36, and the school is believed to be the basis for Pensy Prep. I don't buy that. I've read this, when I was doing the research on J.D. Salinger, you read this rather frequently, that J.D. Salinger's experience at Valley Forge Military Academy is what, made him write about this Pensy Prep. And undoubtedly, he pulled from his experiences. He pulled from those experiences because, that's what people do when they go through any sort of creative endeavor. But a military academy is very, very, very different than a prep school. And what a big part of what Catcher in the Rye was about was this kind of elitist sort of world, this prep school world. Yes, a military school costs money, and usually wealthy families are only going to send their children there. But it's comparing the difference between West Point and Yale. The experience and the person who comes out of Yale versus the person who comes out of West Point, their experiences are different, and how they're shaped are different. This is a military school. The experience is something very different. And Holden Caulfield was a prep school kid. So why am I saying this is, why am I, You probably know where I'm going with this, right? I'm going with it is that this Mercerburg Academy is the prep school which they're talking about in J.D. Salinger. And why am I saying that? Like, oh, well, it's Pennsylvania, and like, Mike, you're kind of like on this path. But no, it goes more than that. This is why I'm saying it. Because the exclusive boarding school takes place in Hagerstown, Pennsylvania. So Hagerstown is a fictitious place. There is no place in Pennsylvania called Hagerstown, just like there is no prep school called Pensy. But, what there is in Maryland, right here is the Pennsylvania-Maryland border, is Hagerstown, Maryland, right? What do we have here? Hagerstown, Pennsylvania. Here is Hagerstown, Maryland. 13 miles away from Mercerburg Academy. So undoubtedly, like, as I said, like, Salinger's experiences probably at the boardings, at the military school was, influenced him. But I'm going to suggest this Mercerburg Academy played a bigger role into it. Okay. So that's not the whole point of this. This is just like this is the warm up of where I'm going to go with this. But that was what kind of like, as Jesse and I are driving, as we're driving through here, I go and I see this Mercerburg Academy, and I'm pulling it up on my phone. I'm like, holy shit. Like, this is seeing what this is, and I know what Hagerstown is, and I put that, I just put that all together. I'm like, wow, this is connected. And I'm going to go deeper into this in the bigger video, which I'm going to talk about J.D. Salinger and baseball and MK Ultra and all that sort of stuff. But we're going to continue on with our journey. So Jesse and I, we continue to go down here to Blue Ridge Summit, and we don't really know what we're looking for in Blue Ridge Summit. We're like, let's just go drive around and let's go see what we're going to find. And, we ended up, we were driving around, we got a little bit lost, and we came down here in this part of the world. And, I'm going to go back to J.D. Salinger, and then we're going to tie it all back together in a moment. So when you go and you look at J.D. Salinger, when I did that like brief, and when I say brief, like, maybe like 30 minutes of total research to prepare for the Real Trilateral Commission, the one which just came out. And that's the whole nature of the Real Trilateral Commission. Like, we just spend like, half an hour just looking around and seeing what we can come up with, because, that's what it's about. It's like 3 different viewpoints looking at the same seemingly random sort of thing and seeing what comes up. But what I've experienced so far in terms of doing 4 of these Real Trilateral Commissions is they tend to point to something much, much deeper. So the only thing I really knew about J.D. Salinger before getting into the Real Trilateral Commission and seeing like, he was a character in the book, which was the inspiration for Field of Dreams, was, I knew about J.D. Salinger, and I knew about all of the murderers who had Catcher in the Rye, and I knew there was this like implied MK Ultra Manchurian Candidate connection between J.D. Salinger's work, and, the narrative which they tell us is regular life. So when I was doing that research on J.D. Salinger for the Real Trilateral Commission, I wasn't surprised, but, it was new to me to see that, Salinger was, had worked with the OSS and was involved, with classified projects, during World War II. And that's definitely like a really, really big red flag to me. Well, I didn't go any deeper than that in terms of the preparation, for the Real Trilateral Commission. But I did do some of this research, or I delved in deeper as Jesse and I were driving. Actually, I did more of that research when we were doing the longer trip, when we were going all the way from Lancaster through all of these kind of roads, all the way to the birthplace. And in that time, I go and I discover, I see that it says right here, this is just Wikipedia. Salinger was assigned to a counterintelligence unit, also known as the Ritchie Boys, in which he used his proficiency in French and German to interrogate prisoners of war. In April 45, he entered Kaufering 4 concentration camp, a subcamp of Dachau, I don't know how to pronounce it. He earned the rank of staff sergeant. He served in 5 campaigns. Like, this dude was like deep in it. And this is what I'm going to get into, like the tying all of that to the Catcher in the Rye and the baseball, and that's phenomenal. But I'm reading about this. I'm doing just like initial research in the car, like not knowing what's going to happen. I'm like, all right, well, what the hell is this Ritchie Boys thing? I've never heard of the Ritchie Boys. So the Ritchie Boys were a U.S. special German-Austrian unit of the Military Intelligence Service officers and were enlisted men of World War II, and they were trained at Camp Ritchie, Maryland. Many of them were German-speaking immigrants of the United States and often were Jews that fled Nazi persecution. So if you're familiar with the Quentin Tarantino film Inglourious Bastards, this is not the story of the the Ritchie Boys, but it is inspired by the Ritchie Boys. The Glorious Bastards, the incredible story of the Ritchie Boys. Inglorious Bastard Frederick Mayer has died. This from, your army. Mayer, a Jewish refugee from Germany, a naturalized U.S. citizen, was recruited by the OSS, the World War II predecessor of the CIA. He volunteered to lead Operation Green Up, one of the most daring and successful missions behind German lines. Like, this is what if you're familiar with the Inglourious Bastards, it's all about these Ritchie Boys, and these Ritchie Boys include J.D. Salinger. So try to guess where I'm going with all this. Remember, we're driving. Me and Jesse, we're driving down here. We're going to Blue Ridge Summit. We go through Mercerburg Academy. I never heard of that before. There's a seemingly J.D. Salinger connection. We're heading down here, and then we go and we get lost. And when we get lost, we're right up here, and we go down this road, and we're kind of getting lost, and then we end up right here in Fort fucking Ritchie. Never before had we heard of Fort Ritchie, never before, and we find ourselves in the belly of the beast. Here's some of the pictures. This is the beginning of it. I'm going to go into this in greater detail in the next video where I go deep into it. This is what the front of it looks like. This is Jesse walking around. It was shut down. This is all empty stuff. We walked around all these sort of creepy places. This is where it gets really, really interesting as well. And this is where I'm going to wrap up on this video. So right here we could see, let's go look at this. Fort Ritchie, it's in this high field, whole field cascade, Holden Caulfield, who knows, maybe that's it. This is Highfield Cascade. I hadn't even thought about that before, Holden Caulfield and Highfield Cascade is where we get Fort Ritchie. But we could also see right here is that Fort Ritchie is right next to Camp Louise. And I've talked about this in my shows with Emily before. But my mother, same woman who was a secretary at the Edgewood Arsenal during all of the testing, the Army's mind control testing in the 50s and 60s. She worked at Edgewood. She also went to this Camp Louise. And Camp Louise, we see, is right next to Fort Ritchie. And for 1 year as a boy, I went to Camp Airy. These two are related. Right here is Camp Ritchie. Right here is Camp Airy. We could see they are 8 miles apart. So I don't know what to say about all this, my friends. I'm figuring this out in real time. I'm sharing this with you, but I'm going to end this, with a sus rating. We're going to continue deeper. It's going to be the deeper aspects. Going to be less about how this overlaps in my story, but nonetheless, this here is sus as fuck. So that's what we got today. I hope this meets you well. There's a lot of dark, unnerving stuff with this. We are in a strange, dark, unnerving times where we got to start looking at our reality and our narratives with some different viewpoints if we want to move through this in a way different than what is laid out before this. So with that being said, this is Uncle Mike. Enjoy the rest of your day. Be kind to the people around you. And until the next time.